So we turn to this special plenary now, marking the launch of a major campaign with a global business coalition for education to rally the support of the private sector around education. As well as championing business engagement in education, the campaign is going to call on the private sector to double its spending on education by next year. We all know, over the past 2 days, we know well enough that the case now is overwhelming. We've heard the statistics, worth repeating. 1,000 CEOs recently surveyed. A third said talent constraints kept them from pursuing market opportunities. Bill Clinton said it again last night. $1 invested in education returns 53 in value to the employer at the start of a person's working years. So why should business not contribute more? It already provides an estimated $550 million to support education in developing countries, but it supports global health to the tune of 16 times that amount. So how can business then lead the effort to put education at the top of the global agenda? I call upon Vikas Pota to tell us.
Thank you very much, Kate. You know, the importance of this discussion cannot be stressed enough. What we have is nothing short of an education crisis, in my opinion. And I speak as the head of a charitable foundation that looks at education. When we look at the crisis, we think about all those children not in school, all those kids who cannot learn, who cannot read or write, all those adults who are illiterate. We look at the post-conflict, post-emergency world education, and I just think that, you know, we could be doing a lot more. And when we look at the analysis and we look at research, what it shows is exactly what you said, Kate, which is actually the quantum of money going in education is far disproportionate to other sectors. There's not an issue with the other sectors, it's just that the private sector, in my opinion, should be doing more. So what this campaign looks at is to set a challenge to the private sector to increase their contributions into global education initiatives. So by 2020, what we're looking for is for companies to invest at least 20% of their philanthropic or corporate social responsibility spend on education initiatives. So that's what the focus is. And we're hoping that by engaging business leaders in this dialogue, we think that we can make huge strides in making sure that this funding gap that exists of some $20-odd billion is actually bridged. Because one thing that we learned from conferences like this, as last year's Global Education Skills Forum, is education ministers saying, well, we can't do this by ourselves anymore. We need effective partnership, and that is what this campaign is about.
Okay, well, let's talk with some of those partners then. Majid, first of all, Majid Jafar, CEO for Crescent Petroleum UAE, and there's also Jim Schnabe, co-CEO, SAP Germany. And you're going to be co-chairs of the campaign. So what are you going to bring to the party?
Well, I think that the key of the campaign is that it's an advocacy campaign. What we're trying to do is, first of all, highlight the issue and increase engagement and commitment. But it's not an intention to be prescriptive. There are a lot of good things that are being done by companies. So it's first of all measuring those, highlighting those, and secondly stepping up and getting the companies themselves to commit. Now, of course, there's UNESCO's framework for business engagement in this sector, which gives very good guidelines. But it's not that we're going to be raising money. What we want is actually, through the network effect, through each region, starting here in the Middle East and then going on to Europe and then taking it through the 5 summits to all the continents of the world, to get the private sector to commit to this area. So
a commitment, but you're not talking about a cash commitment as yet?
No, absolutely. They're their own, but we're not going to be taking money from them. It's getting them to pledge to at least target the 20% of their CSR and social engagement or social investment spending.
And is that
hopefully more than
doable?
That. I think so. In our company, it's already well in excess of that. And I think that actually there's probably a lot that's going on that isn't being measured and recognized and therefore directed. But there's a lot of learnings to be had between companies and across different parts of the world. And there's clearly a challenge which has been identified in terms of the almost 100 million of children who don't have access to education, hundreds of millions more with access to poor education. So it is a business imperative. It's not about charity or philanthropy. You know, the businesses have already identified this is our core challenge, is human talent. For any sector in the world, for any size of company, for any part of the globe, that's the #1 challenge. So it's about investing in our raw material, if you like, when it's still raw.
Thank you. Jim.
Well, I think the traditional approach has always been that companies educate the employees of the company, so to say, and there was a clear responsibility there. We're trying to argue a case of much earlier engagement. You said it very well, you know, at the raw material level. And why is that? Why is that necessary, in our opinion? Well, I think in a phase of development where things are progressing in a normal pace, then I'm sure the public and society can take care of the foundational education of children to some extent. However, I believe that we are facing a future of very rapid development, very rapid transformation. And I fundamentally believe that we are moving from, let's say, the industrial age to a digital age with dramatic changes as a consequence. And these changes will happen in much shorter time frame than we've seen any time in the past. And as a consequence, you could say that the technology itself is the paradox. Here, on one side, the technology is forcing the reskilling of human beings everywhere. And at the same time, technology is the opportunity to create a new business environment for companies of all sizes and all industries. And maybe also, I believe, a fundamental way of reaching everyone in the world with enormous knowledge through technology at zero cost. So we could actually ensure that everyone gets well educated. And I think that's why we're engaging. We believe that you can no longer sit and wait for the traditional systems to solve it. If you want speed, this partnership between the business side that goes beyond the employees in terms of responsibility and actually develop the skills of the future is necessary.
So are there any, and I'll come back to the technology question, obviously, but are there any obstacles then left? Or has the argument now been won?
I believe that the biggest, I think from a technological point of view, there will be radical changes happening in all industries. We've seen the change in the music industry. This will happen in all industries. And so in that sense, there are many unanswered questions. We need the young people who often have the biggest ideas and the most radical ideas to participate. And I believe that fundamentally we are having an opportunity of 2 billion people coming online that used to be off the grid and off the innovation cycle. Now we can bring them in. I think technologically wise, the technology is there. What we need to do is team up so we don't have individual efforts that don't scale. If we can team up, and I certainly suggest everyone from business in the room should team up around this initiative so that we can have a fast start.
Because there's no argument otherwise. I mean, because you have expressed in the past a surprise that no big business figure has really stepped forward in taking a leadership position on improving education. I just wonder why you think that is.
I think that one of the goals of this campaign, which I'll be very happy with, is to create advocates and role models of people to actually champion this from the private sector. I mean, one of the statistics that you mentioned was the amount of money that's pumped into healthcare. I think it's partially the responsibility of the private sector to come forward and do the same for education and become the Bill Gates of education. I think that's a really important role that the private sector can play, and we're delighted that these 3 business leaders have actually signed up to that.
Hani, let me bring you in at this point. Hani Ashkar, you're the Middle East Managing Partner for PwC UAE. So how will PwC be backing the campaign?
Well, this is actually a business imperative for us. It's absolutely critical. We employ about 40,000 people every year around the world, and those skills are absolutely essential in a different business world that we have today. So the ability to be flexible, to move around, to be multinational, to be analytical, to work in teams, all of these skills today are absolutely critical. And even across the Middle East, matching up those skills required in business with those coming out of our education sector are absolutely essential. And this for us is not a nice to have. This is absolutely essential, really committed to this. And in the region, we've also set up a PwC Academy, which we're using to develop those finance skills and qualifications, to top up those core educational skills that come out of universities with those finance expertise that we need within the profession.
And following on what Jim and Majid was saying, has the perception changed within the private sector that spending on education now is an intelligent investment as opposed to just a philanthropic gesture? Do you think that perception has tipped now?
So I definitely believe that it has tipped in every industry that is already recognized as a knowledge in the industry. But I think it'll happen everywhere as you need to innovate business models and come up with new ways of reaching markets. I think it'll happen everywhere. It's not completely done yet, and I think we're here to try and advocate for that future where talent is not just a task within the company. It starts much earlier. For instance, in IT, we want more women. And we figured out that you have to influence girls in the 4th and 5th grade to inspire them for IT. And therefore, you have to start much earlier than when they get employed. Well,
we'll come back to that as well. I want to bring in Irina, though. Irina Bilkova, you must be delighted, first of all, with the announcement. Any reservations left at all? Any obstacles that you can still foresee?
You know, it's a very exciting time to have this Business Backs education campaign. This is something that we have been very much encouraging, working with the old partners, and I really would like to commend once again GEMS Foundation for this initiative. As it was mentioned, we worked with the Global Compact, which is the business framework of the United Nations, working with the business community all over the world. We have launched with them our guidelines, a framework for business engagement in education. I think Jafar just mentioned it. And there we have identified the 3 drivers, if we may say, the 3 instruments which are conducive to a good investment in education. If you allow me, the first one is to very clearly define the interest, the strategic interest of a certain company or a global player in education. We all know the innovation, we are speaking about that business brings the skills, the needs to have managers and people who are relevant to the different business environments. But also on the other side, which sometimes it's missed and we have met very, very frequently. This is the shared engagement of a company around certain social responsibility. We know that people nowadays are socially engaged. They're engaged in protecting the environment, in tackling global change, in fighting poverty. And the very fact that a company is engaged in such project boosts morals in certain company. We have seen it in our partnerships very strongly emerging. And the last, if I may say so, recommendation that we have to business is just to be smart, to be innovative, to be creative, to be imaginative, to look for new different models of contributing to education. But as long as we speak about, I don't disagree, I hate to disagree with Vikas on the issue of education crisis. I would say it's a learning crisis. We have education sometimes, but we don't have learning. And I think that is why private business is stepping so forcefully nowadays in such a strong way, because learning is something different than just education, than teaching. It is an entirely changing environment. And this is where a business can contribute immensely to this. So we are very excited about this campaign.
Good. And just those concerns that I know have been raised over the past 2 days, that business leaders, and I think we've addressed it a lot, but it'd be nice just to get your sort of final say on it, that the concerns have been raised that business leaders can, I use the word corrupt, and forgive me, but corrupt education using it as a vehicle to pursue self-interested dreams and financial gain. And I thought, you know, are we ready to put that concern to bed?
I think we are beyond this, so to say, classical model of business working in education or in any other, in health or in any other area. I think it's not about just promoting one business model or one brand. I would just like to mention a very successful project that we have with a global company like Procter & Gamble. And it's around, it's called Always. It's around their brand name Always for girls' education. But when we started this project, and they tell us, look, in any case, we don't need you in order to promote our brand. It's there. It's just the opposite. We are probably more interested in using their brand in order to promote girls' education, in order to promote the transition to the lower secondary education, the adolescent girl, to speak about the adolescent girl in some societies and environments which it is a taboo to speak about these things. So I would say it's just the opposite. It's not us promoting their brand. It's us using, rather, their brand in order for them to promote our ideas around girls' education and adolescence of girls.
And I want to bring the guys in on this, but just on that then, and you in turn have a responsibility to capitalize on this new commitment.
Yeah.
So how will you do that?
Well, I think we are scaling up all this achievement that we have been done, and I think that it's really goes. It's a win-win situation in these cases, in these projects. I don't see any danger in this respect. It's really a win-win situation in business and education.
Okay, but gentlemen, won't the real test come when we look at the areas where you don't, and I hear what you say, Irina, about the PR perspective, and then that's also been put to bed, but the real test surely will be the investment that we then see in areas that you don't have a self-interest. There are lots of, when we talk about failed states, and Majid will talk about the Middle East then to pick up first, and the disadvantaged areas where there is arguably no PR, no payback for you, isn't that going to be where the real test of this investment comes? Because we need to see really investment there first and foremost.
Yeah, so you've got, you can break it down. You've got some parts of the world, and we've heard the figures, where just no access to basic education. And that obviously needs to happen because that's a basic human right. But then you have other parts of the world, and this part of the world, the Middle East, North Africa region, where there is education, but perhaps it's the wrong sort of education. That's one problem. So we've got huge youth unemployment, despite the fact that many, many companies are complaining they can't get the talent that they need in many sectors. Then you've got, obviously in this part of the world, in particular in recent years, with conflict, with turmoil, we've had illiteracy rising again. We've had plummeting of female enrollment in schools, girls attending schools, which is a disaster on so many levels, and there's a very good panel coming up, and there have been several. And this big challenge we have across the region of youth unemployment, the education skills gap, is a key part of that. And the private sector is screaming out that it's not finding the talent. But if you wait until the public education system and even the universities produce the output, and then it's not right, that's too late. So even at the university level, where there is perhaps more higher education engagement by the private sector, we need to go back even further. And there are good models for engagement in the K-12 space. It's not to take over the public education system or try and replicate, but it's actually to engage in, because the old paradigm has moved on. And it is a business imperative. It's not about, you know,
but is it an
philanthropy.
imperative across the board? Again, coming back to that same question,
Yeah.
is it an imperative across the board for, you know, we have youth unemployment in Germany, Europe, you know, but what about the really tough areas?
The difference in this region, you know, well, you mentioned Germany. Private sector engagement through mentorship programs is much better in countries like Germany and Austria and Switzerland. Southern Europe indeed has a problem. But unlike Southern Europe, here we have a youth bulge, you know, population rapidly growing. So it's a chronic as well as an acute problem here, and we don't have a welfare state in many countries.
So then talk me through the specifics then of how this new announcement will then help address that and bridge that gap.
Okay, so the objective is through all the different summits to effectively get the companies to sign up to the commitment. So first of all, measuring what they are doing, because that's important. You can't improve unless you measure, and actually, you know, even in our company, we hadn't measured until we signed up to the campaign. I was pleasantly surprised by the results, but we can still do more and help direct it. And then through the measurement, and then you have a metric by which to improve, by which to pledge. higher commitment in this area. And then learning is a key part of it, which is why it's a global campaign. So what's been effectively done in one part of the world by a certain company, if properly highlighted, can hopefully create replication in other parts of the world.
And sorry, I know I'm pinning you down, but just if I'm a layperson, I want to understand how your expertise that you're all bringing to the table, how are you going to bridge that gap? And the measurements, metrics don't mean much to me anymore. I want to know the practicalities of how you bring in those youths that haven't had the education they need. What are you in the private sector going to be doing about it?
Okay, so sometimes it's directly relating to your business. I mean, in our, in the oil and gas business, if we're operating in a developing country in a remote area, improving the existing school there, and there's no budget in local government there, or indeed building a school is something we would do. It's a benefit to our employees and retention. But a huge benefit to the local community. Looking in the Middle East region, one project which I think is excellent and can be replicated in Jordan is Madrasati, our school, which is under the Queen Rania Foundation. They identified the 500 most deprived schools in the public education system in Jordan and matched them up to private companies who were willing to adopt a school, both investing in the hardware in terms of repainting, equipment, supplies, and so on, but also helping partner with teachers and the ministry officials in the provision of the software of the education programs as well. And that's been very successful.
So
that sort of thing. It's not to push aside the role of government. No, not at all. But it's recognizing in this more complex global economy, a multi-stakeholder approach is needed between academia and government and the private sector.
And you're all nodding at that. Jim, just bringing, because your employees, well, actually, in terms of sort of the cash funding and employees going out and mentoring, the sort of the getting your hands dirty at the coalface, as it were, is also just as important, isn't it? So you're all nodding. You're in agreement with what Majid has just said.
Yeah, no, I actually believe that there are many good examples, very concrete examples, even in the underdeveloped part of the world. We launched a project in Africa called Skills for Africa. We believe that in the software industry, while Asia is currently the big growth engine, in a couple of years Africa will be. Middle East and Africa is currently the fastest growing regions in the world, coming from a lower base, but with the rush for raw material and resource. These regions will leapfrog from a technological point of view, and therefore, if we invest now, we might be the leader when the growth comes. So we did the skills in Africa. It's extremely well perceived, and of course we get interest from talented people to join our company. We have launched a platform called Genie here in Middle East, which is really about more than education. The idea is to give an e-learning platform combined with the unemployment to a job connection, and most importantly, the idea of bringing in the small and medium-sized startups into this process, because they often are the ones that will solve the unemployment problem. And they have the big ideas. And we benefit largely from fostering an ecosystem of startups. We have more than 1,200 startups that build on our technology, things that we wouldn't even imagine building, because we are a big running business that need to take care of the next quarter. Well, they actually have the wild ideas, and we offer them technology and education and skills to get it done. And it's a good example of how even this region and even Africa is not philanthropic again. It's about creating growth opportunities for the future.
It's good business sense, because I was going to put it another way and say, how will it hold your regions back if business doesn't come on board?
Well, I think, to my point earlier, it simply takes too long. The speed of change is so fast that if we all sit and wait for the normal system to build the skills that we need, it's not going to happen, and we will have a lost opportunity. I can say in Europe, we talked about the unemployment in Europe. We have estimated 400 to 500,000 empty seats in the IT sector, and yet we have unemployment among young people. So there's a radical skill gap in Europe. and we need to fix that. Again, we're not waiting. We launched an effort called the Academy Cube with the intent to identify, develop, and bring jobs to 100,000 unemployed young people in Europe. And my point is, we'll talk a little bit technology later, but with technology, we have an unprecedented opportunity to do that at almost zero cost.
And of course, that will help with awareness, because one of the things to each of you, I mean, just use it in a tiny example, in the UK, business startups, government will offer grants, and yet nobody takes advantage of them because they don't know that they're there, or they're not looking for them. So I wonder how much awareness among the young there is of what you are now doing. And that's something that all of you, UNESCO and everybody you've got to raise the awareness to get those kids, the unemployed, to come to you in a way.
That's correct, and I think in broader terms to come to us as a company or our ecosystem of companies that work with us. And I think this is a model of the future, the network between companies. So every time we hire one person, and over the last 4 years we've added 20,000 people to our company, our ecosystem adds 10 or 20 times that amount of people, which of course propels our success again.
Hani, what's PwC going to be doing specifically?
Well, just building on that earlier comment, if we take markets within the Middle East like Iraq and Libya as an example, I mean, the major impediment to not investing and growing our businesses in Iraq and Libya is that shortage of skilled talent, quite honestly. So why wouldn't we invest in sponsoring students, in building capabilities at that graduate level? And so we're really committed to that. We see that as a business imperative, and there really isn't just much choice around that. We've also set up a public sector institute in Jordan, as well as a shared service center that is tapping into the skills in one part of the region to make an effort elsewhere. We think that's the workforce trend going forward, with shared service centers, with a remote workforce, with using technological platforms. And so the skills required around that are very different than was the case traditionally with bricks and mortar and people reporting to the office at sort of 8 o'clock in the morning and staying all day. So what we're really looking to do is develop a new breed of talent, if you like, that is quite flexible, adaptable, multicultural, able to work across borders. And the way to do that, we believe, is to make that investment and really try to match up the skills required with what that educational sector is producing.
And coming back to the cold, hard cash, I'm going to be slightly naughty for a minute, Hani. Will you encourage the companies that you advise to put less in tax-efficient schemes, shall we put it, and increase their tax contribution and put it into education instead?
Is that a trick question?
I said I was going to be slightly naughty, but I mean, you know, that concept of strongly encouraging companies to put more back.
Well, I think in terms of the CSR programs, most companies, if you break that down, and Majid broke that down, you'll see that actually a big chunk of it does relate to education. We could do much more.
But I suppose the person on the street would say, and it's obviously, it makes the news, because people will say, why aren't these companies that are making so much money putting it back into the country where they're making that money? That's where I suppose I'm coming from. And it's, you know, if we're going to change perception and say this is a good thing that you're doing, should we also not be encouraging companies to put more of those profits that are so efficiently put elsewhere back into education?
I think it's an imperative to do that. I think linking in with the educational programs in terms of sponsorships, apprenticeships, and being heavily engaged in the skills that are coming out of those institutions is critically important. I think we will encourage, we're doing that, and we would encourage all of our clients to be doing that as well.
I've put you on the spot.
You did.
I have. I just wondered, do you think he's answered the question? Vikas, you're smiling.
Listen, I love PwC. You know, I think the leadership shown by business leaders like Hani, I think is really important. And what this campaign is trying to do is use their networks, use their leadership to actually lead this discussion, because currently it doesn't take place. We heard a few days ago from Tony Blair that, you know, in Abu Dhabi that, you know, education should be at the top of the G8 agenda. Yes, absolutely, but it should also be at the top of every boardroom meeting that takes place. And that's why this leadership position of these three individuals is very important in this. And I welcome and encourage everything that they can do.
So just to build on that, why wouldn't the chemical companies be sponsoring the chemical engineering programs to ensure that the graduates have the required skill sets? Why wouldn't the financial services companies be heavily involved in ensuring that the skills required for that sector are developed within that particular curriculum? So it's very much about linking the skills that are required with what's coming out of there.
Agreed, but it's not just the skill set that's required, is it? There is massive funding gap that needs to be filled. That's got to be first and foremost, hasn't it? I mean, Irina, can you come in on that and then Jim just respond?
Yes, I just wanted to react a little bit. Of course, the issue of taxation and everything is a very domestic, so to say, issue, and there are very many different models of funding public activities. The most important, I think, is to recognize that education is a public good, first and foremost. It's financed by the budget, but of course it can be supported by the private sector, and increasingly so. From our point of view, we need, and I know there are many ministers here in this hall, and they know that we are advocating higher budgets for education. On an average, it has to be not less than 6%. What we see in some cases is that budgets are increasing in nominal terms, in absolute terms, but in relative terms, the budgets for education are decreasing. And we don't think this is the right approach. So there are countries where the budget can be between 6 and 20% even. It depends, of course, on the situation. And then I know that many governments are struggling also with collecting these taxes. So it's not simply let's give money. Let's use money smartly. Let's first collect our taxes in the countries. Let's fight corruption. Let's make the institutions strong. Let's make the government work. And then, on that basis, have the right plan, the educational plan, and run around this educational plan. Let's see how we can attract also business to work with us, how we spend this money smartly. I think this is also a challenge for many countries. Sometimes there are high budgets, but the impact is not very high. And this is where also we are working to strengthen some institutions, to make smart budgets for education, to make the right education plans, to put money where the needs are most.
Jim.
No, of course, the funding challenge is always going to be a challenge, but I think we need to look into the future, because the funding problem depends on the cost of delivery. And I think we come from a past where the education was a rather expensive proposition. You had, let's say, 20 people or so in a classroom, and you had, physical materials. I look at the future in a very different context. I believe we have the biggest and fastest growing knowledge collection of humankind ever in the internet. It is doubling every 18 months. Some of it is irrelevant, but there's a lot of it that's really relevant. And I think we have a delivery mechanism with technology which will eventually put the marginal cost to zero. And I think that's where we need to look at the smartness of the investment, to see how can we reach more people with the greatest knowledge that's available. And I think there are ways of doing it. I think Clinton said it nicely yesterday. You probably had to separate between the primary school challenge and the higher education challenge. I believe that today my son or my daughter learns more from the internet than they learn in school. And the school system has not taken this opportunity and embraced it yet. And in the higher education area, we have experimented very successfully with the combination of e-learning and access to professor, where in one training class, we got 13,000 students from all over the world. 2,500 graduated. Can you imagine, and you compare that to the 100 that would be in the class and the 70 that would graduate with the same effort of one professor. Now, the biggest value of that was actually that these thousands of students connected in a network, and we found people that were smarter than the professor, which we have never had found in a traditional system. So the UN had this commitment to zero hunger in the world. I believe that if we use these new opportunities to the best extent, we could have a similar plea when it comes to education.
There are some that might be thinking, is that going to see secondary schools become extinct, as it were, because everyone's going to be online?
No, I don't think so. I actually, and we have seen that in our experiments with this, that you need to have actually more time spent on the individual. And you can do that technologically. When you do the online tests, you understand the individual needs much more accurately. And the professor can spend more time on individual coaching and individualized learning than you can in a classroom where 90% of your time is spent on giving the course and only 10% for the individual. And without that, it's not very useful. So you need a combination of the two worlds.
Vikas.
Jim, I want to pose you a question. I know that's Kate's role, but maybe I can also ask. The question that I have is to do with digitization. So we speak about the proliferation of technology, and you rightly say that places like Europe, the Americas, there's great penetration. Our foundation does some incredible work in Uganda. And when you look at Uganda and you go to some of the places that some of our trainers have gone, forget electricity. Yeah, there's no paper, there's no pens. The classrooms are shot to pieces. So what do you do about that, and how do we get businesses engaged with that? Because that's where sometimes we have to focus as well. So when a salesman comes and tells me that technology is the answer, I often say, well, let's look at that as well.
No, it's clear that most of the technology that we are, envisioning does require access to electricity. My point is that through the technology, we might be able to leapfrog. Look what happened to the mobile infrastructure in Africa that leapfrogged, a generation of technology. I would argue that with the right investments and commitment from large companies, we can get even Uganda online. We can get, tablets are they're very affordable today. They're very powerful, and it is possible to create a modern infrastructure instantly. I would actually argue that in some countries it's easier to do the leapfrogging directly to this world than it is in changing the legacy countries that is used to a completely different way of education.
So leapfrog as opposed to concentrating on the paper and pencils. I mean, Vikas, what's your response to that? Is that...
No, I accept that, and you've seen examples in history, for example, India, and what's happened with regards to when I was early on in my career, the Y2K bug, which affected all the banks, and that's because they were using legacy software and mainframe systems, and all of a sudden they've propelled and they've missed out that whole wave and gone somewhere else. I think it is very possible, but one of the things that we ought to be doing in this campaign is actually demanding that education ministers who, like those who are here, sit at the same table as finance ministers, energy ministers, business ministers, because we have all these discussions in a vacuum. And so when we discuss infrastructure, core infrastructure, I think it's very critical to do that.
So who's going to bring that? Go on, Majid.
Well, no, building on that, I totally agree. Education ministers and higher education ministers should be part of the national economic councils in countries. They're not. It's generally seen as a public service provision, and it's not part of the economic strategy. And I think that is a mistake from the government level. Your earlier point about money, it's really not just about money, and it's not just about getting bodies through the system. In fact, that's where I, as coming from the private sector, suspect the government's motives, because they want to tick boxes and announce numbers. And we're seeing, particularly in this region, the wrong type of education. In North Africa, it's a staggering figure that if you have a university degree, that means you've been the whole way through, you're 3 times more likely to be unemployed than if you don't, because it's the wrong type of education. What I particularly like about this campaign, and why I said yes, is because first of all, it's like any good advocacy campaign, starting with highlighting the issue and the awareness and measurement, and then going to encouragement. We're not trying to prescribe. Of course, the framework is very useful to help companies frame their own strategy. But companies like independence, and they like to frame their own strategy. And also competition is something we understand in the private sector. Once you're measuring and ranking and highlighting, you'll get those spirits working. The other thing about it is it's a peer-to-peer campaign. We can all be Bill Gates. It's not about one poster boy. It's about all of us signing up, and through the network effect, which has already started, here in Dubai, and will be spreading hopefully over the coming year. We, through our peers that we trust, because they're companies like us, will sign up to the campaign.
Irina, what do you think?
What I hear is, in some cases, music to my ears, because we have been advocating for so long that ministers of finances, ministers of economies also take up education. And here in this hall, there are more than 30 ministers of education, and I think I know all of them. And I know that they're fighting within their national administrations. We know how administrations work within governments, and it's a give and take process, and they have to fight for budgets, they have to fight for recognition. And within the Education First initiative, with the very strong support of the World Bank, we have started already last year, and it will continue this year, to have meetings of ministers of finances, ministers of education coming to the World Bank, sitting with us, United Nations agencies, looking at what are the challenges in the very different countries and trying to work it out, and trying also to see with the international donor community, because definitely there is a financial gap. You mentioned, we know that there are $26 billion missing every year if we want to achieve education for all. Primary education, and definitely we are not there at all. On the contrary, this gap is increasing. And we encourage business to invest also, what you said, Kate, is extremely important, to invest in so-called unpopular areas of not direct, I would say, benefit imminent. Tomorrow you'll get something. But invest in these remote areas, invest in girls' education, invest in the marginalized people. I think the benefit of this has really a multiplier effect all across the issue of sustainable development. And nowadays, I think most of the companies, and especially those global companies, I'm listening with a big interest what you're sharing with us. I think you're well beyond an imminent interest tomorrow. Let's just have something. But it's the global good, public good that is at stake. And this is what we at United Nations, through the Global Compact, we want to create, to instigate, to share with the private sector. Nowadays we have the government, we have the private sector, and the civil society. We are all three part of this world, part of this humanity, part of this goal of achieving sustainable development, which has three legs: economic, social, and environmental. We all have to care about it. And this is our appeal, and this is our engagement, and this is what I think this campaign, Business Backs Education, is all about.
I think there'll be a lot of people that would agree with that. So my co-chairs and Vikas, your role now is not just a call to arms for business, but it's to get the education ministers in as well. Is that right? Round one table together. Is that?
I think one of the aspects of this, and what we're trying to get out of it, is there's relatively little known about how much business does back education. Although it's a nice slogan, it's a nice phrase, and we all sign up to it. One of the aims of this campaign is to actually produce some research, baseline research as to where and what the situation is. That's the first thing. The second thing is, people often don't ask educators what they want in the education system from the private sector. So, I think you mentioned earlier that we're going to be having regional summits. At each of these regional summits, we're going to actually put together a group of school teachers and principals to tell us, what is it that you want? What kind of engagement are you looking for? I think that will be handy to guide businesses as to how they could direct their commitments.
And also, all three of you, I know, Majid, you work a lot with youth organisations, so what feedback do you get from your younger population, the people that you're working with?
So in this region in particular, and you're seeing it a lot now, pressure from governments actually to the private sector, employ more, because it's a huge challenge, and they just simply cannot absorb. The absorption capacity is gone in the public sector. And then the private sector's response is usually, you're producing through your education system the wrong product, or a deficient product in a way, for what we need. So this is why it's sort of a rational or logical business case. And young people have fantastic energy, fantastic initiative, how they are absorbing knowledge and information is changing. The global economy is changing, how companies do business is changing, how government service delivery is changing, and yet education still seems to be with the same model that we had a century ago. So it's not about trying to replace it or abolish it, but how to enhance it.
And how can you do that when this sort of initiative, you'll forgive me, isn't new? We've been calling on business to get involved. Perhaps it's gained more ground recently, but I mean, UNESCO, you have been trying to do this for quite some time. So one, where has it worked? Perhaps we can learn from that. And two, where it hasn't worked, what lessons need to be learned to ensure that this time, this initiative can work?
I think there are many good examples of success, good success stories in it. And I agree with Vikas that it is not that business is not supporting, is not investing in education. Maybe it has not been that visible, it has not been that structured, it has not been that focused, I would say. It was more linked, more fragmented, more linked to their imminent business needs. But we know that business invests in education. What we want to achieve now is to have a global campaign that accompanies all the other, I would say, political drive to put education on the global political agenda, because education is the success, I would say, of every single development effort. And we are convinced into that, be it in the area of environmental protection, be it in the area of biodiversity, of water management, of gender, you name it. So without education, nothing, no initiative, no action in this area can be sustainable. And we're talking about sustainability here. This is what is at stake nowadays. It's just not one project and we are done. We are happy because we have trained 10 people and we are done. It is about sustainability of all this effort. And I believe that we cannot achieve sustainability without involving, I mean, when I say us, intergovernmental organizations, United Nations, I hope ministers here share my opinion also, unless we also bring into the picture the civil society, and in this particular case, the private sector, because as it was just mentioned, the learning process is changing, education is changing. We are now preparing a very interesting, we are engaged in a very exciting exercise of revisiting some of the big reports, trends in education, the last being the Delors report. When our experts sit and looked at that, it was published in the 90s, it seems to be the same, but all the environment and the way we implement all these good things, ideas that we have entirely changed. So I think that we have to make the next step of changing the way we learn, the way we teach, the way we train, the way we give skills to the young people, the way we relate them, we prepare them for the life of work. And this is where the big, I think, challenge is nowadays of creating jobs, of matching jobs and requirements, and also where the business can come. The classic area, I think, nowadays, because we are all speaking about technical vocational training, education, we are promoting in many countries, we are establishing, we are putting it within the education system. 2 years ago, we had a big congress in Shanghai of linking it, of how we integrate it in the education systems, and also relating to the higher education, the tertiary, which is a challenge for many countries. And we all know technical vocational training is expensive. It is not simple to train one teacher or to prepare one textbook. You need equipment, you need laboratories, you need staff. It's expensive. And this is where I think private sector can step in very strongly in many parts of the world in order to create these opportunities for young people.
So we're almost out of time, but what questions then, Irina, while you've got them on the stage, then would you put, Hanny and Jim, let's bring you in, what questions would you ask of them on those very points then, or what would you, what requests would you make of them?
Well, I would like to ask them to look with broader eyes, I would say, on education, to support education even where there are not imminent business interests. Of course, in our business guide framework, our first recommendation is look at your business interest in investing in education, and second is look at the merit of it and the value that you share. But I really think that it is a time for engagement in something which goes beyond imminent economic profit. We have a huge agenda nowadays of sustainable development. The planet is under pressure for different reasons, and I think that business has to take its responsibility in solving these issues.
Hani.
Yeah, I mean, what resonated for me on that is, and this is one of the areas we'll take forward on business BECS education, is increasing that level of engagement. I just don't see that degree of dialogue happening between the different stakeholders that are here. We mentioned the ministers of education, we mentioned business, we mentioned the actual educational institutions. Is that dialogue really happening? Do we really understand each other? Are we all pushing in the same direction? That's really one of my takeaways, and if we can achieve that, aside from the cold hard cash, of course, and push that forward, then we're starting to make progress.
Jim?
Yeah, well, I kind of see this radical change going on. It's a little bit like we went from, you know, urban farming to the industrial age, and that change was, of course, a reskilling, but it took 50 years, so there was a generation to get adopted. Now we're going from the industrial age to the digital age, and it takes much shorter time. And so my reflection as a leader was that we are fortunate to be leaders in a time of radical change, because any change is an opportunity. At the same time, that fortune comes with an obligation and a responsibility to look beyond your immediate quarter and try and understand how we can impact the world as business leaders in significant ways. I do agree it will foster a cooperation. I can tell you one of my most inspiring moments with the political side was actually in Korea, where they made a minister of the creative economy. And I do believe, as a final remark, a topic we haven't really touched, that a lot of the unemployment problems could be resolved if we don't find jobs for people, but enable them to create their own jobs, i.e. this massive opportunity of innovation in this digital world will come from the startups, and big companies can help that as well. Then we go far beyond just education, and we radically change the environment that we're in, I think to the better, because we can solve the waste and the resource problems in new ways when you get the new ideas from areas that had little resource to begin with. They typically have the better ideas on how to manage without resource.
And Majid, final word from you.
Well, I would say, particularly to all the companies out there, start by measuring what you're doing. It's like if you want to improve your health as an individual, you have a checkup. So start by looking internally and look at what are you actually doing and what have you done on education. And that's your baseline. And then please find out about the campaign, and we're coming to you, and sign up.
We're coming for you, or we're coming to you?
Yes.
To you gently.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. I'm going to ask you to stay there before I thank you properly, because, and Vikas, I will give you the last word, but there is somebody in the audience who would also like to have a word. I'm going to invite her up to the stage now, and that's the Deputy Mayor of London, Munira Mirza, who has an announcement to make. So let's hear that. Munira, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Mayor of London, and I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting us to participate in the event. It's been a privilege to hear so many advocates and activists for education from around the world, and I've come away from this certainly feeling like we have so much to learn in London. So thank you very much for the contributions that I've heard. The Mayor is very sorry that he's not able to be here today, especially because he always enjoys visiting Dubai. But he has recorded a video message, and in that will be a special announcement from him on how we in London want to contribute to this global campaign.
Hi folks, Boris Johnson here, Mayor of London. Very sorry I can't be with you for the Global Education and Skills Forum 2014. I gather this event is known increasingly as the Davos of education, though this year clearly without quite as much snow as you'd expect in Davos. I'm delighted that you are concentrating on the role of business in education, because when I look at what's happening in London, clearly there are many, many ways in which we still have to compete and to catch up with other cities around the world. We still have kids who aren't doing as well as they should be in numeracy or in literacy, and we're not as high in the PISA rankings as I would like. But in my lifetime, the position in London schools has changed. And you've got kids in our city, a great city with all its problems, now starting academically to outperform kids in the rest of the country. And that is at least partly because of the role business has taken in London in mentoring, in championing good education, in supporting schools, and of course offering young people the career opportunities, the aspiration that will get them going. And so that's why I'm very pleased with what you're doing today. And I'm thrilled that later this year, we in London will be hosting the Business Backs Education Initiative here in our city. Thanks very much for listening, and have a great conference.
So as you've heard, we're pleased to be hosting the Business Backs Education Summit in London on the provisional date of the 8th of September. And for us, that's a chance to reflect on some of the incredible things that businesses are already doing in London and measuring that, but also to urge them to do more. And we feel that in London, there are some huge challenges. Like every country that's represented here today, we have some unique challenges and a unique context, and hope that business can play a part in that, whether it's by expanding volunteering, by mentoring, by encouraging more businesses to sponsor schools and educational initiatives. And we really need to find a way to ensure that the poorest children in London are able to compete in what is now increasingly a global marketplace in our city. So giving them the opportunities and the ability to be successful in that kind of environment. Thank you very much once again to the organisers. We look forward to a further discussion in September.
Munira, thank you very much. Thank you. And Vikas, before we say our goodbyes, just to outline further again, these summits are going to take place starting with London in the autumn, and what you want to achieve, what you want the outcomes to be.
Firstly, I just want to add my thanks to the Deputy Mayor of London, Munira Mirza. Please give her a round of applause. To use the convening power of people like the Mayor of London and his office is quite important to this. So in London, we will see them convene a group of business leaders from what is undoubtedly the financial capital of the world. I'm sorry to my friends from New York, but that is the truth. The second is that we will also be doing the same in New York during UN Week at the Clinton Global Initiative. We will also be hosting a Business Backs Education Summit in Hong Kong, as well as in South Africa. Now, the purpose of all these summits is to go and speak to business leaders in these regions and to get them on board. Majid is being far too polite in saying that we will cajole them. We are coming after you to make sure that you are on board with this campaign. There's one particular thing that I want to highlight at this stage. We have great companies in PwC, SAP, and Crescent on the stage, but we also had a few others sign up, and I just want to make sure that I take the opportunity to thank them. And this is the first wave, and I'm sure that companies that are represented over here at the Global Education and Skills Forum will come back next year in larger numbers and commit. So we also have the Honeywell Group of Nigeria, Majid Al Futtaim in the UAE, the Jumeirah Group has also come on board, Equity Bank in Kenya, and I'm sure many, many other companies will also come and support this campaign. The purpose of these summits is exactly that, to have that discussion, to have that dialogue. So when you come back in a year's time to this event, we're able to speak more authoritatively on this subject and to make sure that investments from the private sector are directed in a way that actually is meaningful and works.
Well, thank you very much, and we do indeed look forward to seeing you all again in a year's time to see what we've all achieved. Thank you very much indeed, and gentlemen and Irina, thank you very much for such an engaging session. Thank you.